this is a reasonable use. I would have preferred to see the house rented to, for $100,000, but as you heard earlier today, this is not something that we believe is feasible, and if we choose to do something, it could subject us to potential litigation or something from somebody that feels very strongly about what's written into the will. So I really think that rather than have the house sitting empty, this is a decent use, and I think it brings value to the town, and it also makes this a little bit more attractive, and it might open up more opportunities for the chief to do a better job, not a better job, but expand his recruiting to somebody who possibly wouldn't consider coming here because they didn't think that they could afford it. So, it's not the optimal use for the house, but it's a use for the house, and I think it's a sunk cost for us, and it would be essentially cost neutral for the most part.
Thank you, Councilman Whitmer. Vice Mayor DeGoya, Councilwoman Lewis.
Go ahead. Question.
Okay, so, I have to agree with Mr. Ruggiero that the Knox Play School would, I think, fit very well in the house for a number of reasons. I've said it before, the drop-off and pickup would be easier for parents to, at the front end of the park, rather than winding their way all the way to the back, to the trailers that are there now. And I've always said that I think that with the house, it could be a lovely little play school. City manager, talking with him, indicates that, you could create a school environment adjacent to the house and use the land around it for their playgrounds and still achieve that same less traffic through the park with the drop-off and pickup and use the house for another use. When this idea was first broached during a meeting, I thought it was an amazing idea because I know that so many of our police officers, men and women, do live so far away. So I'm very much in support of it. There's a lot of boundaries and rules and regulations and stipulations that have to be worked out to make it not a police playhouse. And I think that was kind of a flippant or rude thing to say, but it is something that would help our police force be refreshed, be more motivated, and be on task better to serve our residents. And it would be a good recruitment tool for those police officers who do live more than 40 miles away. Some of our police officers, I think, live over 100 miles away, and the commute is very hard. But that's, not to belabor it, I think Councilmember Whitmer made lots of good points, and I'll just say I support that.
Thank you. Vice Mayor DeGoya.
Well, okay, so I'll start just by respectfully disagreeing with Lou, who I always find your comments provocative, and the strength of your comments are refreshing, but the comment that we could fire the police officers and we get 1,000 applications from all over, you're not up to date. The number one operating budget problem in the town of Atherton is our inability to hire and retain our officers. We are short 5 officers, and that means there's zero floaters. And some of these officers, they are working 12 hours driving 2 hours, sleeping 8 hours, and doing whatever else they do in only 8 hours, getting up, driving 2 hours, and working 12 hours. So on the days that they work, John, they are under incredible pressure. And on the days they don't work, you're right. They've got lots of time off. But when they work, this is a real problem. And as the economy improves, for those towns and cities in the Central Valley, as they start hiring more officers, they are going to take our officers away. Because who wants to drive and work 16 hours a day to be home 8 and turn around and go back? Nobody. It's our #1 problem in the town. So we need to find tools and carrots that we can use to hire the kind of officers that meet the standard that our chief has set. And I don't know if you've noticed the most recent 2 officers that have been hired are absolutely remarkable. One is the poster child for the city of San Jose, and on all their posters for hiring. And it is an incredible find and plum for us to get. And I just want to do a shout out on that because really there's a lot of respect that's deserved there. But we need to give the management here the ability to hire, and to the extent that this will be a recruitment tool, and I believe it will, because being home only 8 hours a day and driving and working 16 isn't acceptable, this is going to help. So I think it's important. I think the second most important thing is that we keep this house so that it will be available for a future city manager. I completely agree with what Councilman Widmer said. If we're at the point where we need to hire somebody and we can't, was it?
They're asking him for something they should know that I'm
Just
leaving.
tell George. Sorry, George.
No, it's not a comment about George, but you're not gonna be here for 30 years, and Atherton is. And I think we're planning, we're gonna build a new civic center, we're planning on what this town is gonna look like for the next 40 or 50 years. So I really feel strongly that we need to maintain this house as an option, and while I agree that moving to play school is the right thing to do, to transform the house into a play school loses the house for a future city manager, police chief, and so I think we need to maintain it. This is the best solution that I can think of. I'm sure that there are some issues that we need to be aware of, and you guys have pointed out some of those concerns, but I believe that the framework that the city manager has defined this within is exactly the right framework and that we can do it. I actually think that this is the best use of the asset that we can obtain right now because it addresses our #1 operational problem. And if it doesn't work,
And it's
then
not
we won't
permanent.
use it.
Right, it's not permanent. I mean, it's
not
flexible.
permanent.
We have the flexibility.
We're good? I have to echo everybody's comments. I'm gonna say just keep focus on your ability to manage and monitor, as well as the chief's ability to manage and monitor how the house is used and who and when, and address the concerns between the female occupancy and the male occupancy, so we can move on. Okay, let's go ahead and move to
Mr. Mayor,
item,
can I have one sentence of rebuttal?
no sentence of rebuttal.
Or one more information I forgot to give you.
No,
About the 8 town managers that have lived there
No.
20 years.
no. We're moving on to item number 13. We're hitting that one. So we're going to item number 13, which is the consent agenda item that was pulled. If you'd like to make any comments related to it, would you please go ahead and start off with the staff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This is just a letter to the FAA from the subcommittee on surf air and air traffic that the council formed. That's Vice Mayor Bedoya and Councilmember Lewis. There was some articulations that there needed to be some changes potentially to the letter. Councilmember Widmer had a comment that he mentioned as well. That's what the staff has to say.
Oh, wow. Jeez. That was good. Any comment? Yeah, I know, it's rare. Questions from council?
My only comment for, and I think Wally also pulled this, my comment for pulling it is that what I'd like to do is work with the mayor or work with the vice mayor to add potentially a paragraph that would discuss an expansion of the vector, which is something that we've all discussed here, and and actually would have applicability more than just Surf Air. It's other aircraft as well, as I pointed out. And let the letter go, and I think that would serve the community well as those that are affected.
Yeah,
So, um,
questions?
So I think that this letter should stand as it is, because it is addressing the specific raise in the altitude that Elliott and the working group approved. And if we want to send a separate letter regarding the spread of the approach vectors, I do believe that that is already approved and in place. And Vice Mayor DeGoya may correct me if I'm wrong, but that is my understanding, that the Surf Air is currently using that additional wedge vector approach 10 degrees back and forth, and specifically more along Highway 101 when possible.
This is a question, so.
Well,
We'll address that. But maybe we should let.
My comment is that the letter doesn't just say Surf Air. I realize in the staff report it talked about Surf Air.
no, it's
Okay,
all,
but it talks about aircraft going in and out of San Carlos Airport. And as I pointed out, there's substantial growth in the amount of commercial traffic that's going in and out of that airport, including not just prop planes now, but two-engine citations and multi-engine prop planes as well. And it is very, very disruptive. And not everyone is adhering. There was, as you pointed out, the Surf Air people said that they would move, although I have to say from my personal observation and my inputs from my constituents that they're not moving it over and adhering to never fly over the same house twice in the same day or more than twice in the same day. That's not happening. So,
I just want to get to a question, please.
oh, okay.
Because I can go back, I want to get to
Yeah, okay,
Walt,
go ahead.
please,
No,
that way we
just
can get
go
some public
ahead.
comments,
Just
because
public.
and then we can summarize here, please. Walt, you Walt, please.
Wally Sleeth, 227 Catalpa. First, I want to applaud the Vice Mayor and Ms. Lewis for how hard they've worked on this. I know they've been through a lot and they've worked very hard. My complaint right now is that I don't think this letter does what I think you indicated to a couple of residents over in Lindenwood that you would do, which is, this is overly supportive to Surf Air. I think what we need to say to them is, and I'm going to read to you and I'll give this to you if you want to then incorporate it into the letter. This letter of support is conditional on actions actually improving the noise levels. If there is little or no improvement, the town of Atherton reserves its right to seek a change in the airfield used by Surf Air. We do not believe small airports like the one at San Carlos were ever intended to handle commercial air traffic in the volume Surf Air has geared up to undertake. These small airports were built to accommodate small, non-commercial traffic by local plane owners and pilots. And I think we need to make that statement as a town.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Please, Jim.
John Ruggiero. About 20 years ago in Atherton, we had a problem with the noise plane, not just one airline. And they had a group, Uproar, I don't know if you ever remember that or heard about it. That was a group that met in Atherton, they were citizens, and a lot of people were involved, the Liebises and so on and so forth. And at the time, they gave each person a phone number to call when they observed a plane that they thought was too noisy, coming the wrong route. In other words, they were coming right over the top of Atherton from Woodside, right down the slot. And that's when you'd make a notation and complain. But this group was a fairly large group. I went to meetings. It was held in private residence. There'd be 20, 30 people there sometime. An uproar was the name of it, but just for your information.
Thank you, John. Any other final comments on this item number 13? Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and close public comments, bring it back to council for our final comments.
Okay. There are a lot of issues here. Let me first address the issue that we call the vector. The history there is that when the airport noise ad hoc subcommittee from the council, initially composed of myself and Councilmember Dobby, and when he resigned, Councilmember Lewis was appointed. Well, no,
Yeah.
you came into the very beginning
I was-
before we had a formal committee, that's
Right.
right. The two of us
She was
met.
first.
I was first.
Yeah, I was pulled in by a number
You
of
were-
residents.
Right.
You got bumped.
Use your mic,
Sorry, thank you, okay. The history is that the initial target that we had when we met with San Carlos and Surf Air was to attempt to move the GPS approach from its current approach, which essentially comes in over Encinal School, goes up Middlefield, and then in North Fair Oaks, veers down into San Carlos, going right past the AT&T Tower in Redwood City. And we attempted to move it to come in over 101, on the theory that there is lots of commercial and industrial development around 101, there's plenty of noise from 101, it'd be much less disruptive to residents if we could do that. Certainly it would be disruptive to those residents that were most affected in Atherton along Middlefield Road. So we proposed that. And we proposed a few other things. We proposed that Surf Air look at their operational procedures, and we proposed that the GPS approach be increased vertically so that it would be elevated. The idea of moving the GPS approach laterally, ideally over 101, basically was shot down because there were two neighborhood groups, one based in the Willows, the other in Palo Alto, that began to organize because the approach would impact them by moving the approach over 101. And when you look at 101, it's not a straight line. The GPS approach has to be a straight line. So in fact, if we were to move the approach, which we weren't able to get done, but if we were to move it over 101 as much as possible, 101 curves, and where 101 curves, that approach actually goes right over eastern Lindenwood. So we actually would be moving the GPS approach from what is now pretty much west Lindenwood, right along Middlefield Road, to east Lindenwood, right along Bay Road. That's a problem for our residents, not only in the Willows, who have a problem because the planes, as John said, they do come in over Woodside. They make a turn, so there are different points where these planes have to turn. They make a turn, and some of them continue over the bay and then come into SFO. Those that are coming into San Carlos come in on the same path, turn somewhere in Palo Alto, and come down into this GPS approach. What Surf Air agreed to do was to not insist that all their pilots fly the GPS approach, so whenever they could request a visual approach, which they can do when they can see the airport when they're up in the air and there's not a low cloud cover, they can request from the airport tower a visual approach, and they agreed to alter that visual approach as much as possible to come up 101 when they could do it, and not to fly over the same residence or the same line more than two flights in a row. And they have been doing that. So their pilots, so there's a few things that happen when you ask an airline to change its operational procedures. One is they have to agree that they're going to do it, then they have to get their pilots to comply with it. And those are two different things. They take a little longer to get the pilots to comply. Well, they in fact have done that. And the pilots, they are flying on visual approach days, not just on the GPS approach. Sometimes they're on the GPS approach, but they're varying it. They're varying it both to the east, which would be along 101, and sometimes to the west. And I have gotten calls from people that live in Redwood City to the east, who are in that area where if you're flying up 101, you're gonna get noise, who are upset because all of a sudden they're getting a lot more noise. And, you know, that's on a visual approach day. So the working group decided that we couldn't continue to press to move the GPS approach to the east, because of the reaction from the residents.
And you encroach on SFO airspace if you
Well,
move
we
it
didn't,
further.
we actually felt like we could do it without, but because of the resident opposition in those two areas, the working group didn't feel like it could pursue it, and the FAA indicated that that wouldn't be something that they would embrace. So the alternative to that was to propose increasing the altitude, so that the slope of the plane when it comes down is greater. It would increase the altitude 500 feet. That would reduce the noise on the ground until you got to about the AT&T tower, which is 3 miles out. That's where they would start to slope down. In fact, it would be more cost effective for the airline, because their approach now is they're able to glide more as they come in. They don't have to power up as much.
And without their wheels.
And we believe that that would be beneficial, and that's what this letter addresses. Now, it's true that this is not specific to Surf Air. It applies to any airline using that airport. What isn't true is that there's not greatly increased traffic subsequent to Surf Air starting to go in there in June. In fact, the airport is tapped out in terms of how much traffic they can handle, not from planes coming in and out, but from the related services on the ground. They can't handle any more service, so I haven't heard any proposal to increase the ability to provide service, but Surf Air, I think it's 8 flights a day, and it's the maximum that they can handle. Now, the final thing that really is very important is that this increased elevation of the flight path, while it should be an improvement, and that's what this letter addresses, because this is a new approach. The most significant noise reduction is in operational procedures. And the way that I found out about that, other than hearing from several pilots that had recommended it to me because I'm participating in this, and Elizabeth and I met with the fellow who designed the original GPS path.
Well, and he came up with this.
And he
solution.
came up with the increased
Elliot came up
vertical
with this.
approach. That's
Yes,
true.
and he's the one that's spearheading it, and he has asked us, all the electeds and residents, to write a letter like this.
That's right.
Specifically to bundle with his request, his formal request to Than McLeod of NorCal TRACON FAA.
That's right.
So that's why this letter should stay pretty specific to this altitude approach,
Okay, but let me just finish, because
I know, that your
since I'm
procedure,
into it,
yeah,
I
no,
need
go
to
ahead.
address the operational issue,
Yeah.
because I think the most material thing in terms of reduction of noise, which is what we all want, is for Surf Air, and it's really a Surf Air problem. I mean, there are problems with other airplanes. Because of the visual approach, I see them in West Atherton too, but because what we did is we put a meeting together with pilots, some of whom fly Pilatus planes, which is what Surf Air flies. They fly Pilatus planes into San Carlos. We put a meeting together at the San Carlos airport between Surf Air and the pilots of other charter companies that are flying in there and have flown in there for years and years. And I won't use the language that those pilots use, but believe me, they didn't hold back from criticizing Surf Air. What Surf Air is doing is they're dropping their landing gear at 6 miles out. And when you drop your landing gear, especially in a small plane, you have to power up in order to stay on the path. And so they're dropping their landing gear 6 miles out, they're powering up, which is the noise we hear. And we don't hear it so much from the other pilots. We really hear, and the people that live right under the GPS approach absolutely know when it's a Surf Air plane. They can hear a certain whine because of the way they've powered up. Most of those pilots don't power up until they cross the AT&T tower, which is 3 miles out. And they think that's perfectly safe, and they really let Surf Air know it. And the new guy who is head of operations in Surf Air that came from Frontier Airlines heard it. We were both at the meeting, and he said that they were going to implement procedural changes. Now, I don't know that they've done that yet, we haven't had a meeting since then, but in my opinion, that will be the most material change to the noise problem that we experience.
So, a higher altitude, you keep your flaps and your wheels up until you get down to 3 miles out, which is AT&T tower practically, and then you start descending at this steeper, glide path. And then you drop your gear and your flaps, and so literally you've flown over at a higher altitude without your gears down, creating all the wind noise that over our residents, and so hopefully that will, make a big difference. That's the plan. That's why I really believe that this letter, notwithstanding your, strong language in a letter, if we want to write another letter, a supplemental letter, we should do that.
To Surf Air.
Yeah, to Surf Air, but this is going to be bundled with the formal package that is being presented by Elliott
To the FAA.
to the FAA. And this is a similar letter that everybody is writing, all that they've circulated to do, the residents, so.
I mean, we can modify the letter to make it individual. It doesn't have, it's not a form letter.
So
No.
can we agree that this letter goes, you write a second letter, and you and Bill can work together in making that second letter happen? That's
Well,
Well, I think it's appropriate to,
Yeah,
we
because
haven't actually formally communicated to Surf Air.
yeah,
Because I think it's more than a Surf Air issue. I beg to differ with your comment, because I see the aircraft. There's a Cessna-based commercial flights that come screaming in, and they come in as early as 6 o'clock in the morning,
But
and they go out at 11 o'clock.
all of the flights will
No.
have to go
We should ask
according
them
to
about
this.
Right, but they all need to vary the vector, even.
It doesn't
And
hurt.
there is a number to call.
Yes.
Do you not, there is a hotline number to call.
No, it's on the website. It's not on
So,
the-
Yeah.
so just for your sake and in general, it doesn't hurt to add them. So why not add them to the second letter, any aircraft going in commercial-wise to,
Well, that's my point, because the letter doesn't mention
Right.
Surf Air.
So
The letter
just-
just mentions change the thing, and I just said.
No,
but the-
because it's generic.
This one-
It's a new procedure.
so just for the record, this one's fine. The second letter, add the commercial aircraft, commercial information, work with Rick, have that done, we're good. Okay? Simple.
Well,
Is that,
that's fine. I'd like to get Wally's input
Yeah,
on
we
the
got
letter
it. We
because
got it.
I'll email you.
and you guys can have that reach, so that's perfect, as
Here
long
it
as
is,
you
it's
just,
right here.
it's in your hands.
Who's the second letter going to be signed by?
It'd be signed by me,
So you want that to come back to the council before release?
Yeah.
doesn't need to.
Well, the ad hoc committee, actually,
problem. It can come
we
back.
could have, we could have just signed this and sent this on.
Correct,
But-
because we want
I don't think we need to
So
go
it-
back to the council.
Do you, I don't think it, wait,
I'm
so it can be signed by the,
can you sign it?
Yeah.
You can sign it.
I'm okay
I
if
bless
we
you.
work together and you make sure it's okay and he signs it. I think that's
Okay,
gonna get
so
it all
you can
done
craft it,
without
we can
impacting
send it out,
anybody's
any objections,
But
no
what about the
objections.
Brown Act, because I'm involved in this also.
right, so we can both sign it.
The second letter, this letter, we're good. You're
Oh,
not gonna
okay.
be involved in the second one. We're good.
Yeah.
We're good.
Okay.
All right, so let's, that's the way we're going with that. Thank you. So let's,
Did you ask for approval?
no, it's just staff direction.
Did we pull on anything else?
No, so we're good on it. We're moving to item number 27,
It
which is.
was a consent, it was on consent, so we have to
Oh,
move.
apologize.
So I make a
Please.
motion to approve item number 13, to have the mayor sign the letter to Ann McLeod as written.
Second.
Any further discussion?
So no, because we said we were gonna do this other part,
We're
so
gonna-
let's have the amendment.
So we'll add the amendment.
As the
Second
amendment,
letter.
plus we'll do the secondary letter with Rick and I, and we'll go to the city manager with. Okay, thank you.
Well, I don't think that has to be, that,
That was direction, so we.
that's just
That's
direction,
staff
that's not,
direction.
that's
Okay.
not part of
It's
the
easy,
motion.
it's
Okay,
not on the
good.
agenda, so
Yeah.
we were just.
We'll go with the original
ancillary
motion,
to
fine,
do.
staff direction on the second one,
Say
and I have
aye.
a second, okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
you said
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye,
And then
good.
staff direction.
Staff direction on the second.
Okay,
Lee, thank you. Item number 27, council reports. Thank you everybody for council reports. No need to comment.
Where's yours?
I did,
Uh,
I did.
Mine's decompressed in a cloud.
It's decompressed in the cloud.
Did
you say it's
Technology.
It's depressed too. Any future agenda items?
Wait a minute,
Perfect.
did you get one of these?
I did, thank you.
Did you get one of these?
I did. Number 28,
Somebody obviously doesn't have one.
future agenda items.
Future agenda item.
From the thing.
Yeah, none, we're not talking, are we talking about future agenda items?
Yeah, I'd like to know if the rest of the council has completed all their FEMA training. Chief, maybe you could report on that. I'd like to know that.
Our FEMA training?
Yeah, because it was supposed to have been done by April 1st.
We'll update the council via email as to which ones.
Please, could you update us who hasn't had this?
Copy all of us on it.
I will do so.
Please,
Thank you.
let us all know. Okay, thank you
Did-
for bringing that up.
Did we get the forms?
All right, so we're gonna go ahead and public comments number 29. Any final public comments? Please step up.
I didn't get it.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm Sandy Lee, and I'm just confirming that the signs at the crosswalk at Linden are approved for sure to go in.
George, the
Yes,
sign?
we're gonna be putting in the
Non-regulatory.
regulatory, not
Non-regulatory.
advisory signs.
Thank you.
And actually, we're also going to be striping that crosswalk to alert folks.
The
to its
direction.
presence.
That was the second question I had. Also, at the transportation meeting, there was, in the technical memorandum, I don't think the second item got discussed, because we were all kind of talking about the crosswalk issue and the signing there. But on that technical memorandum, the issue 2 was based upon observations and field measurements made along Middlefield Road between Encinal and Oak Grove. There are portions along the segment where allowing parking will create conflicts when drivers open their door and encroach into the bike lane. Recommendation was to identify the areas along Middlefield Road between Encinal Avenue and Oak Grove Avenue that do not have sufficient width to accommodate parking and sign those areas for no parking at any time. And I believe that would be on the southbound direction, because that's where, there's usually a dozen cars or so that like to park just across Encinal. And in looking at that, they're parking in the southbound direction, and they could park north of the school, of Encinal Avenue. It wouldn't be that much different of a walk, but it would certainly be out of the bike lane where the kids or the parents ride, going with the traffic, so that would be a help. And on the bike rodeo, I'd like to just ask that they please focus on riding bikes in the crosswalk and on the bike lane the right direction, because I'm still seeing kids doing both. There are some that are walking now, but just this morning I almost had a head-on collision with 3 bicyclists
Well, I'm
on
glad
the
you
bike
did.
lane. Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
for your
you.
comments. Any additional comments? Seeing none? Oh, great, you had to. I tried, I was not quick enough. Greg,
And we didn't stay here this long just to look beautiful.
Must be a campaign, but you're moving fast.
No, we had a report done by Jack Ringham at the Transportation Committee, in which he did a very thorough job of analyzing the risk and the data for Fair Oaks that have been accumulated over the last 6 years.
He
And-
spoke on it.
He came this
He
morning.
came and spoke on
Came
it
and spoke.
earlier today.
Yeah, you missed it.
Oh, he came here today?
Yeah.
For public comments?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, good, good. Well, the Jack, I just want to give him credit for doing it, but I want to add the urgency of the matter. I personally have, almost been killed twice from the left turn on Virginia, which is ridiculous. I mean, the cars are coming around there 40, 45 miles an hour in a 15-mile-an-hour zone, and it's suicide. I mean, there's the vision, you cannot see far enough that I think he cannot stop. And I've had a couple of them where they almost, we stood and looked eyeball to eyeball, but they stopped. And I just think that it's got to be taken care of. And there was a fatality in front of 174 Fair Oaks before the next speaker lives there, but, I mean, it was, I don't know the circumstances, it was late at night, and I just think that it's, anything, those trees, between the trees and the electric poles, the vision is almost zero on trying to look down the street to see traffic coming. So the recommendation, I think, and I don't know what Jack said, but I would think that some sort of speed bump variation would be the thing to consider. And I'm not sure the process, I guess the staff, I'm not sure was asked to make a report or not. George, is that true? Were they asked to make a report or?
The item is going to be returning to the next Transportation Committee meeting for discussion by the Transportation Committee.
But the staff will have a report at that meeting?
There won't be an analysis, there'll be just a recommendation that we bring it to the council so that we can do some sort of analysis. It costs money, so it's got to.
So they have to go, the council has to act first for the consultants to do the work.
Correct,
So the next step is the Transportation Committee?
for a recommendation to the city council.
So we gotta wait 2 months?
It was a public comment at the Transportation Committee meeting. It wasn't a scheduled item. Transportation Committee needs to take action to discuss it and make a recommendation to the council, so the council can then direct studies and analysis and staff.
Well, could we move to get the Transportation Commission to have a special meeting before the next council meeting? I mean, it's just time, there's nothing that has to be done, is there? I mean, if we had a meeting 2 weeks from now at the Transportation Committee, and they decided to recommend making a study to help proceed this thing, and they agreed, then they could go to the council meeting next month, and we could save a month of delay. So that would be my suggestion, and I'll
Thanks,
leave
Greg.
it to the council.
Any other comments?
Hi, Kyle Enright at 174 Fair Oaks. One brief comment, my first time attending council meeting. Fascinating educational experience, and thanks for all the time and effort that you all put in here. It's
So it's an election year, you gonna run for council?
incredible that you all devote 4.5 hours plus all the preparatory time, plus all the background work. So kudos to all of you for the civic service. Thank you.
It's a high salary.
That I wouldn't know anything about. Secondarily, just on the Fair Oaks Lane traffic issue, and I know the mayor and I think the vice mayor as well were good enough to attend the last Transportation Committee meeting, so they heard my comments. But you know, I'm a relatively new resident of Atherton, moved here 3 years ago. We have 4 young kids, ranging range from 5 to 13, and you know, I made the same comments at the Transportation Committee. I really hope that it doesn't take one of my kids getting killed on Fair Oaks Lane to move this issue along. So I'm super sensitive, especially having listened to all these issues, to the fact that there is due process and civic process, and I want to be respectful of that. At the same time, you know, I really don't want it to come at the expense of either my or the kids across the street or the couple that just moved in who have 18-month-old